to today's episode of the Simply Financial podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Calandra. Would like to increase your financial IQ with today's episode, which is going to talk a bit about money and stress. I invited, and I am very pleased to say that he said yes, Dr. Travis Parry onto the show today. Recently met him, was a guest on his show. We'll talk a little bit about that. But he's an international speaker and best-selling author of Achieving Balance. He also has a podcast show that he hosts called The Balanced Growth Show, and he is the creator of the Make Time Method. So Travis, I appreciate you joining me today.
Absolutely. Pleasure's mine. Thank you, Chris.
So I love your show. As I mentioned a moment ago, was a recent guest. Also, in preparation for the show, I listened to a bunch of your podcasts. I'm now a subscriber. I'm sure you like that.
Love it.
And also read your book in preparation, and I thought it was great. Really enjoyed it. So to catch listeners up, maybe we could start with telling us a little bit about your book, Achieving Balance book.
Yeah. So 4 years ago, I had this brainchild that was in me like, hey, you need to write a book. And so I started interviewing financial advisors and business owners and found there was this crazy phenomena of trying to, achieve this unachievable balance. And most people don't understand that the old myths and jargon around what balance is somehow being able to accomplish everything at the same time. It's just a myth, a total myth. And with my knowledge base in psychology and my PhD, I put together some research and said, I'm going to write this book. And it's interesting because I was a financial advisor and I love helping people with money, but I kind of was gravitated back to this group of financial advisors that I was connected with and started interviewing them about, hey, what's the biggest struggle with balance? And I found that financial advisors are actually 3 to 5 times more likely to become workaholics than the average American. And I was like, wait, what? What's going on here? And it kind of struck me by surprise, but it's because financial advisors are drawn to this industry with finance and money, and there's a lot of money to be earned, but there's a lot of people to be helped with their financial, goals, but also their financial stressors. And so I found that a lot of financial advisors kind of take on this financial stress and it becomes who they are. And then they get
Yeah.
trapped. They get trapped in what I call the workaholic trap, where they just kind of slide into it and they just allow their clients to take over their lives. And they want to be there for them. They want to be trusted advisors and help them. And yet then they kind of put their health, their family, in sometimes even their own wealth, at risk because of these behaviors. So I wrote the book for business owners, but I found out that advisors are really the business owner that I found myself interviewing the most. So I started a podcast called The Balanced Growth Show. You can find it on any platform. It's out there, and it's really for business owners, financial advisors, and clients of financial advisors who are trying to figure out, what does all this money and stress stuff have to do with me and workaholism and my relationships?
Excellent. And that explains why the book spoke to me, because as a financial advisor, my entire career, I could appreciate the workaholic aspect of it. I could certainly appreciate that sometimes you don't have appropriate boundaries between when you're working, when you're not working. You want to serve the client, you want to help. There is, if you'll allow me, some nobility to the profession about wanting to help people achieve financial success, and you want to be there. Sort of like in sports, you want the ball, you want to take that last shot, you want to have success, and you want to be the guy or the girl, if you will. And sometimes not having the appropriate boundaries, you could create problems for yourself in other parts of your life, family-wise, health-wise, rest-wise, giving yourself a chance to recharge and rejuvenate. So it definitely spoke to me. Great book.
Thanks, man.
What we're here to talk about today is, when we were chatting recently, you talked to me about this other book you are coming out with. So I really wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So tell us about this book that's up next for you.
Thank you. It's called Balanced Wealth. So, this is the whole let's achieve balance. Let's figure out how to get out of the workaholic trap and really live an ideal calendar. I mean, I spend 16 weeks out of the office a year. We travel all over the country, and we've done some international travel now with our family in Costa Rica and other places in Europe. But we want this lifestyle. I say we, it's my wife and I. We want this ideal calendar lifestyle that we can not be just attached to an office, be attached to a business, but be fluid and flexible, but have boundaries, like being able to turn it off. And after I wrote, Achieving Balance, I got to the end. I was like, well, I've got to end this someplace. This can't be a 3,000, page book. But I really left, readers with this idea of long-term balance is helping your spouse and your family, having this family support around you. Anyone that's dealt with any sort of addiction knows that you can't just fight it on your own. It's the true sense of addiction, and there's a cycle. So if we don't look at workaholism as an addiction, I think we're approaching it wrong. We laugh it off. It's a badge of honor. We take it for the team, whatever. But there is a fine line between when we're working too much and when this is actually an addiction. So I found that the biggest problem forcing this into an addictive cycle is financial stress. Financial stress doesn't necessarily mean you don't have money, but that's one aspect of it. If you don't have money, you're struggling. You're doing, 3 jobs and working crazy hours to just try to make ends meet. That's one aspect. But the other aspect is, which you deal with a lot with your own clients, is now they have a lot. And now how do they manage it? And so to relieve some of that financial stress, they ask financial advisors and planners and insurance agents and mortgage brokers and others to help them. Um, so because of that, there's a big struggle in that they, really are working against themselves to try and make this the whole, equation make sense. And that's part of why I'm writing Balanced Wealth. On the other side is, well, let's explore what is financial stress. Where does this come from?
Yeah.
And how can individuals do a better job of not only preventing it, but managing the stress, coping with it psychologically, and also relationally, so that their spouse can support them and they can support each other and really achieve the financial goals that they have for themselves long term. The book isn't out yet, Chris, but it is
Yes.
available at balancedwealthbook.com for a pre-order.
Beautiful. So maybe we could start at a very base level, because we throw that word around stress, but you have, I believe, a strong background in psychology, right? That's why I called you doctor at the beginning. So can you just define stress for the purposes of today's discussion? How would you define stress?
Great question. So most people think of stress as bad, right? It's bad.
Yes.
The reality is, if we unpack stress, um, it's actually, there's good stress and bad stress. The absence of stress is death. Let's just be honest with that. They do a
Okay.
stress test on your heart to see the rhythms in your heart, to see how you're doing. Are you alive? Does your heart respond to exercise, to movement? And if so, how? Anybody that's ever done an ECG, or what they call an EKG, knows that you're going to see heart arrhythmias, and they're looking for kind of what's wrong with the heart to diagnose heart problems. Well, that's a stress test. They put your heart under stress. We deal with stress every day, some of which is good. And psychologists call this eustress. Think of euphoria. Think of any time where you've had something excellent to look forward to, but it might require some of your attention or
Right.
work or preparation. A marriage, having a child, starting a business, writing a book, showing up on stage in front of people. Like most people hate. So that's a bad example, but most people hate public speaking. I love it. So for me,
So
it's
do I.
eustress. Like I get built up
Yeah.
and I'm like, yeah, let's do this. I love these kinds of conversations. It's the same thing. I get all ready for it, but that's eustress and it's good. Now, distress, this is the bad stress. This is the stress we typically are talking about when we throw around that word. And the bad stress could be occasional, it could be chronic. The occasional stress might show up with an argument with your spouse. It might be that a something happened with your bank account and you bounced a check. That's what we used to say. We don't use checks anymore, but we still use that term, right? We went negative. Something happened like that. That's negative stress, and
Sure.
that can actually have a whole bunch of physiological damaging results on your body and on your heart. And over time, chronic stress leads to diabetes, leads to heart disease, even contributes to cancer and many, many other debilitating diseases that that we tend to think of, well, that's stress. We want to avoid it. Yeah, yeah. We want to avoid or learn to cope with the distress, but we also need to embrace life's stressors.
No, very well said. So I want to explore kind of two different components of this, and you touched on it. So you provided me a great lead in, is that if you take someone that's successful financially, I know that's a fluid term, but if you're listening to this, just picture somebody that's financially successful, wealthy, secure, that kind of thing. They often continue to have great stress about money, which is surprising because most people that don't have money aspire to have more money. And part of that is thinking that they will be happier, and a form of that happiness would be less stress. But that often is not actually what happens in my experience. So, why do you think, what are some of the reasons why this kind of takes place?
Great question. I mean, you've seen the gamut, and so have I, of individuals who they still have financial distress, right? No matter the amount of money they have in their bank account. Um, I want to tell you that the biggest issue is the relationship itself. Now, when I say the relationship, there's a couple of components. We have a psychological relationship with money. I can break this down, but most people don't think of it this way. But there is a difference between currency and money. Currency, well, it's now digital, right? We can pay for everything right here on our phones now.
That's
We've
right.
got, digital wallet and everything gets transferred. I mean, I only touch cash when I'm on vacation because if I want to pay a tip or do something like that, or if I'm paying my kid for something. But you know, um, everything is so digital, so we're kind of removed from currency. But currency is the cash, it's coin, it's now, the digital forms. Money is value that we place on the currency. Wait, what? Listen, if you want to boil this down, back in the day before we had any form of currencies, we were trading goods and services for goods and services. That's what we did as a
Yeah.
society. And then we introduced shells and stones and eventually coins, and they became minted and so on and so forth as currency evolved over time. Now we have to understand if we have a negative relationship toward what we value and what the value we place on money, it will affect us regardless of how much money we have in a bank account. For example, I had a client who I was coaching. They're struggling with money. They had a lot of relational problems because of it. And we found out that anytime there was money in the bank, the wife would just hurry and spend it like crazy. So we kind of boiled this down and did some psychological, discovery. And she basically told me she had a very, hateful relationship with money. She felt that it was evil and that money, whenever it showed up in her life, she wanted to get rid of it. So she would spend it But that caused incredible stress on her husband, who's a business owner trying to provide for her family, that every time, thousands of dollars showed up, it's gone. So, you know, we tend to have these what I like to call, and others call, money scripts, or what I like to refer to as your money history. We need to explore, what is our money history? What has it been for us? What have our parents taught us? What have our grandparents taught us, or our family members? And what have our experience taught us over our lives of how we value money? Do we think it's evil? Do we use it as a tool for good? Do we worship it? Do we spend it like it's going out of style because of some of these issues, or do we hoard it because we have a very negative relationship about losing it? Okay. These experiences over time tend to build our psychological relationship with money.
I get that. I love that. It seems to me that for a lot of people that are driven to be financially successful, either, there might have been money scarcity when they were growing up. They might have grown up in a poor household, or they might have seen their parents have money and then fall on hard times, whatever. People are driven. They want to get to financial success. And then when you look at the metrics, when they get there, like when we spreadsheet it and it seems like they are there, they have trouble adjusting from this pursuit, this mentality where they wanted to accomplish something and they can't adjust to the reality that they did achieve it, and they may need to think of things differently. They have a tendency to stay on the same the mental path that they were on, not realizing that they sort of crossed their own finish line, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, totally. And again, it's maybe expectations and goals of where they're at in their psychological relationship with money. If their whole life they've been gather, 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 and then it comes to retirement time, or working less, and they're thinking, well, now I'm pulling away from what I've gathered. They have to readjust the psychological
Yes.
relationship with money. The other factor here too, Chris, is that especially married people, is now they're dealing with someone else who they're sharing accounts, sharing, relationship. That it's one thing to share children, and we can talk about sex, but we can, oh shoot, we talk about money. It's like the most taboo topic in the
Yeah.
world. And all of a sudden, everybody's saying share bank accounts. No, don't share bank accounts. The reality is, it goes much deeper than what I call the external aspects, which is the third part of my book. You really need to understand, what are your internal, your psychological relationship with money. Two, your relational, how the two of you deal with money. How do you share this experience? And acknowledge, gee, you have a money scarcity mindset. I have a money worship mindset. Whoa, where have we come from? Why have we had these experiences? And now be able to share those and talk to each other about them, so that you can begin to understand each other. It's one thing for a financial advisor to, acknowledge and see their clients and say, wow, okay, I can see you're struggling with that. I see you struggling with that. But financial advisors typically aren't, and this, Chris, we're typically not trained on how to deal with couples and their money
Oh, yeah.
psychological differences.
And it's incredibly important if you want to serve the client well. Investment return, asset allocation, retirement analysis, all of that stuff is important. It's all well and good. It's the technical side of the job, but dealing with people's money history, and I like that way better than scripts, which
Yeah.
I've been more familiar with. What's your money script? I like the money history terminology, and I think that better represents what we're talking about. So I love that. Is to help people feel more comfortable with either where they are and also where they are going. And with a husband and wife, they're different people, even though they're a team. They are different people with different histories, different views. and helping them become a stronger team and making better decisions is really good work, fulfilling work, and really serving the customer well.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why I saw this with my own clients and I was like, ooh, I need to do some deeper work. That's why I did my psychology
Yeah.
and my PhD and really wanted to understand because I'm seeing this thrown all over the place. And Dave Ramsey and a lot of other, people are still cultivating this myth, quite honestly, that finances are the number one reason why people get divorced. And so I explored this road. I did all Ramsey's stuff. I went through their programs. I went to a lot of training to try to figure out, well, who knows what. And by the time I got figured out, like I found out that a lot of these coaches and trainers, they're taking research from other researchers and they're making it their own and they're coming up with solutions. I'm like, well, I need to go to the source. So I went back to academia. I left my business, I put it on pause, said I'm going to go after the truth. And what I uncovered, Chris, was actually pretty fascinating. I attended Utah State University and I worked with Jeff Dew. Jeff Dew has done more research with couples and money than any other researcher in the West that I've been able to, contact and connect with. So I said, I want to work with him. I came to Utah State and I did a lot of research with him around the emotional aspects, psychological aspects of money with couples. What it comes down to, and I try not to be too academic, but I'm gonna try to get this right.
Please
And
do.
that is in the world of research, you can't assign married couples to divorce in a group, and you can't assign married couples to stay married. Therefore, longitudinally or throughout time, you can't follow these couples. The only thing you can do is you can track what they've done, take a snapshot, and try to peer back in their history and say, well, what contributed to that? What was some of the problems? What we found and what the researchers have found is that married couples argue about money more than any other topic. It's the most emotional topic they discuss more than sex and parenting and in-laws. It's also the most debilitating, meaning after they argue about money, it typically leads to other arguments. It's as if it's the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And so when couples say, yeah, we got divorced, when they filling out their forms of the reasons why, a lot of times they check the box of, well, it's because of money. So we don't have great data on this. And people want to make it about this problem of money, money. And honestly, that's why I was driven to figure this out. I wanted to know because I saw it with
Yes.
my couples and my clients. I'm like, I want to know. What it really comes down to, though, is pride. Pride is the root of all problems in a marriage. Sharing is the opposite of being proud and individual and selfish, right?
Yes.
Well, if money is one of the most emotional tied things to their mind because of their psychological upbringing and they're fighting about it, it's just what they're fighting about. Now, don't get me wrong, they need to learn how to manage it right. That's why we need great financial professionals. But on the other side, on the relational side, we also need to understand that money didn't cause divorce. It's simply the scapegoat. Make
Yeah,
sense?
I like that a lot. I am I've read Dave Ramsey a lot. I've his books and I've listened to his podcast and candidly there's a lot I like and candidly there's a lot I disagree with. And it seems to me in my career, which spans, shoot, 32 years now, just about, uh, it's really an oversimplification. I mean, I've dealt with a lot of, divorced clients. Either I've met them and then they've gotten divorced, or even worked with somebody who was single, then they get married and they ultimately get divorced. And how it's portrayed, and obviously Dave Ramsey is enormously successful. And so we're not trashing him. This is just more of a debate kind of subject matter, is it's really an oversimplification that if you don't get along with money, you're more likely to get divorced.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
It's a
so
very
much wrapped up in the
oversimplification.
money and so
Mhm.
much wrapped up in the relationships.
Yep.
And I, in my experience, have never had a client. Now it's anecdotal, but I've never had a client and say, "Well, she spends too much, so that's we're gonna get divorced," or "He doesn't make enough money, so that's why we're gonna get divorced." I mean, those are more symptoms, not probably what actually is the
Yes.
disease that caused the divorce. Is that well
Yeah.
said?
Very
Yeah,
well said. You know, it may be anecdotal, but with your experience and your range of, clientele, you can see patterns, and patterns are why we start to observe phenomena as scientists, and then we research solutions and we have ideas. I disagree with Ramsey, and I've actually reached out to them and talked to them about some of these ideas because in their book, which I explored, and again, I went through all the baby steps, and it's helpful, and there's some things I totally disagree with, and some things I agree. He's a polarizing character, and that's who he is. He's a polarizing character, and he's done very, very well because he's made a stance, stuck with it. I don't agree with how he encourages and motivates people, and that's a topic for a different time. But what
sure,
what I did find is that he's using research inside of his books that actually has been disproven by the researchers. Essentially, there is a gentleman that if I said to, to you, John Gray, most people don't know who he is. But if I told you the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, oh yeah, yeah.
oh
Yeah, I
yeah,
know
yeah,
that book. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Even if you haven't read it, you've heard of it. And you understand
sure,
like the basic concept that men and women are from different planets. Therefore, they're crazy. We've got to understand the different species. Not true. That is not based on any factual research whatsoever. The crazy thing is, and this is how we are as a society, just because it's successful, people tend to think it's true.
that's
It's
right.
the number one best-selling book about marriage in the world because John Gray figured out the marketing.
Hmm.
But the research shows that when we pit men against women and we focus on all the things that are different, it actually hurts the relationship more. Where we need to start is, what are your shared goals? What are your shared values? What do you have in common? That's actually what brought you together in the first place. Men and women are attracted to each other because of what they have in common. Oh, you go to this school? So do I. Hey, you like that kind of food? Me too. You go to vacation, to Europe every summer with your family? I've done that as a kid too, or whatever. It's those things that attract us to actually like someone more, the more that we are similar. Now, what happens is we get married and we start to have a family, we build a business, and we forget the things that we have in common unless we work at them, unless we have shared goals, unless we have shared values that keep us going in that direction. So what I do agree with is when Ramsey comes out and says, "Hey, you got to be in on the same boat here or it's
Yes,
not going to work out." What I have seen and listened to his show is I've heard more people that have tried Ramsey's approach by themselves and actually have created more problems in their relationship, calling and saying,
yes,
"Hey, Dave, this didn't work." And this is where I will go after Dave a little bit. And that is, he tends to shame people and say, "Well, you did it wrong. You screwed up. Shame on your spouse for not being involved," instead of understanding that their relationship, it's a marriage, and he actually can be doing harm by projecting this onto people. So that's where I take a pretty hard stance, Chris, is I've done the research on this as an academic, and I have the PhD to back this up, and my dissertation is very clear. And I even cite Ramsey in this in that study about Ramsey and what they've done for marital relationships. And those who have been through the program a lot of times have lower marital satisfaction if they're not on the same page, going in the same direction, sharing their same goals. So I focus on how do you get there? How do you get couples to create shared values, to create shared goals so that they can be going in that same direction? And then they can apply the best use of financial practices that exist.
All right, good. So you talk about focus, like my focus, sort of like one of my philosophies, I guess, in working with clients and in personal finance, being a certified financial planner, is that if you're if you if you're not working a plan, now if you're listening to this, plan does not need to be 110 pages typed up in a binder, eh, but just generically, if you're not working on a plan with your money, if you're out of control, if you're ignoring it, if you're living above your means, if you're not working a plan, if you're not being purposeful and you're not being intentional, then you're probably going to increase your financial stress, whether you have a lot of money or not a lot of money, whether you have a lot of debt or not a lot of debt, whether you guys are on the same page or not, going back to the husband and wife thing, that you want to have a plan and have some purposefulness, some intentionality. And if you do that, that is a key way to reduce money stress. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things couples can do is agree on a plan. If they have a shared goal, a shared direction, if they both have bought into it, then they're a team. And that's what I found in the research I did with couples is when they're on a team together, they have this shame, the shared values, not shame, shared values and goals. They're much more likely to have psychological, great psychological health, marital satisfaction, and this leads to financial stability. So, one of the things that other people like to cite is the amount of debt. Oh, gee, well, you've got a ton of debt, so you've got a higher likelihood of divorce. And there are studies that point to that. But again, I agree with you. I think that's a symptom. It's a symptom of mismanagement or not
Yes,
having a plan or having a plan and quite honestly, just missing the mark. I mean, business owners, geez, do we take it on the head sometimes with the economy? There's so many things we can't control, but that's not the kind of debt I'm talking. I'm not talking about business debt of trying to, to grow a business. I'm talking about spending debt because this
yes,
is a symptom of, well, I'm going to go out and rack up the credit card regardless of what's coming in, regardless, because we don't have a plan of how to spend this. And don't tell me what to do. I'm not going to be on a budget. I don't like the word budget. I do like spending plan because it's
me
about
too.
forward progression. Like, how are
Yes,
we using this money? And I consider it, and I help, couples, who are struggling with this say, hey, what we need to figure out is this is a stewardship. At the end of the day, when we're all done, we don't take any of this anywhere. So it's a stewardship, meaning it's our responsibility temporarily. So how do we use this well together? And that's when I focus them on their own values and what do they share? What do they want to do? For example, my family, we value travel a lot. We value teaching our children by experiences. So we decided to homeschool. It costs more money. We're not exactly, the 1%, but we do really well. And we have 8 children. So I have to do well. This is
yeah,
a prerequisite. And because of that, we've put a lot of our dollars that way. People are like, gee, why don't you have fancier cars or a bigger home? Or that's not our value. I don't care. Our value is we went to Costa Rica for 5 weeks and got to experience the jungle, the beaches, the food, the people, the culture. And that's something we wanted to give as a gift to our children as part of their education. So I think most couples, they never have done this. They never have
yeah,
even created a plan like you suggest, and they haven't gone deeper into, well, why is that pertinent? And what's our values as a couple as we're, stewarding this money?
yeah. So the last philosophical thing I wanted to share with you, and then we could sort of wrap up is, and I'm not an elite athlete, so don't take this the wrong way, but
Whatever, Chris, whatever.
I do tend to look through things sort of like, I think athletics is just a nice microcosm, and sometimes it's easier to kind of picture and explain things or whatever. But there's an expression in sports like, a winning locker room is a happy locker room. And I think with stress with money, is that if you're winning with money, and I understand that that could mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but if you're winning with money, that is also a way to reduce financial stress. Even somebody that, let's say, had a failed business or had some debt, maybe, did some foolish things, lived above their means. But you could still be winning with money, because if you're making progress to improve upon where you are, you're progressing towards a worthy goal, you're winning with money. And whether you're single or married, old or young, winning has a tendency to reduce stress. And it's not the end all to be all, because you could be, too intense, like the game takes on epic proportions when it doesn't deserve to. But I think winning tends to reduce stress. What do you think about that? Is that make sense, or is that maybe unhealthy?
No, what I've seen about motivation and goal achievement is if you only have long-term goals and you never are going to hit these short-term markers along the way, uh, what does the goal mean to you? It's a
Sure.
dream. It's just
Mhm.
always out there. You're never going to be able to really achieve it. If you don't have these short-term, wins, as you call them, I just look at them as short-term goals or mile markers, then you don't have the reinforcement. We get reinforcement all the time. And I don't want to go on a rabbit hole here, but these devices, they have reinforcement, likes, subscribes, and people plugging you back. Even the sounds of getting a text message make us feel good. Like those are the little things that keep us addicted to these devices. And I'm not saying be addicted to winning, because that's a whole different story. But I think to your point, if you have these little wins and you can chop them up as wins and you can say, look what we've done and our progress, that does probably more for you towards achieving a goal than anything else. Spend time celebrating those things. I do appreciate, back to Ramsey a little bit, I do appreciate some of his 8, baby steps. And one of them is just like, get a little win, get a little of emergency fund and pay off your first,
Yes.
debt. And because as you get momentum, momentum builds velocity. And in
Sure.
every sport I've ever played or any other competition I've, been a part of, even playing chess, Chris, if you have velocity and you're making moves faster and better than your opponent starts to psychologically cower in the corner and be like, "Whoa, he's better than me," and they start to make worse moves. And before you know it, the guy that had the velocity is winning the game.
Sure.
And I think sports, games, game of life, it's
There
what
you
it
go.
is. I like the concept, brother. 100%. I do.
Wonderful. So, everyone, you've been listening to my discussion with Dr. Travis Parry. For those that are listening, if they wanted more information about you, I already said in the introduction, your book, your podcast, but anything else you want to throw out there so people could learn more about the excellent work you are doing?
Yeah, if they go to Make Time Institute, maketimeinstitute.com, it has my podcast. It has this book that they can download. 50% off as the paperback. You can get it free as an ebook. Um, and it'll have, a button uh, for the Balanced Growth Wealth book when that comes out. So that's sort of my hub of all these resources. So maketimeinstitute.com. That's where we're at. You can reach out to me there, Travis at maketimeinstitute.com. I'll respond and reach out to you. But definitely take advantage of this book, Achieving Balance. Grab it now. The second book, Balance Wealth, is really the uh, the bookend, the second version of the start that we got going with Achieving Balance. So I'm excited to deliver that when it comes out later this year, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I greatly appreciate it. I'll be back with you on the next episode of the Simply Financial podcast very soon. Meanwhile, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do so. I would Appreciate that quite a bit. Thanks again.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of Osaic Wealth, Inc., and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Please note, the information being provided is strictly as a courtesy. When you link to any of the websites provided here, you are leaving this website. We make no representation as to the completeness or accuracy of information provided at these websites. Nor is the company liable for any direct or indirect technical or system issues or any consequences arising out of your access to or your use of third-party technologies, websites, information, and programs made available through this website. When you access one of these websites, you are leaving our website and assume total responsibility and risk for your use of the websites you are linking to. Securities and advisory services are offered through Osaic Wealth, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC. Insurance services offered through Elliott Wealth Management Services, LLC, not affiliated with Osaic Wealth, Inc.